Okay, so you're the kind of person who likes to get things done right. You want the most knowledge in the shortest amount of time.
And you're in the right place. We're going deep on a concept that sounds simple, at first the power of small.
But as we dig in, you'll see how much complexity and impact it really has.
We're taking apart this book called The Power of Small, Why Little Things Matter.
And what's interesting is that it's by Robin Koval and Linda Kaplan-Thaler, who come from the advertising world.
And in that world, they're all about understanding how these little tweaks and tiny details can make a big difference in how people see things.
Right. And what we're really trying to do today is understand their main idea.
Which is this. If you focus on the small stuff, the little actions, the subtle things, the things people miss it, can actually have a huge impact in all parts of life.
We're not talking about getting lost in the weeds.
No, it's about seeing the power in those everyday things that we might not even notice.
So Koval and Thaler start by challenging this whole idea of focusing on the big picture.
They say that this obsession with the big picture makes us miss those little cues, acts of kindness, and gestures that actually make life more meaningful and set us up for success.
Exactly. And they're careful to point out they're not saying big goals aren't important.
No, they're just saying that we shouldn't forget about the power of those little things.
Like they even talk about that saying, don't sweat the small stuff.
Right, and they say their point is different.
That saying is all about not letting little annoyances get to you.
But Koval and Thaler are saying these small actions, these tiny things we do, they actually shape who we are.
Both at work and in our personal lives.
Like, think about it, a real compliment versus one that just feels like you have to say it.
Or how much you can tell from someone's body language at work.
Those aren't just random things.
They build up this story about who we are.
And that story can shape our relationships and careers.
Okay, so they tell this story about Larry, the computer programmer.
And Larry was super good at coding, totally comfortable with all those numbers and algorithms.
But he saw the sales team and how easily they talk to people.
He wanted a career that involved more of that human connection.
But the idea of changing careers was just too overwhelming.
It felt like this giant mountain to climb.
But here's where the power of small comes in. It started with something as simple as a haircut.
It seems tiny, right? But it changed how Larry saw himself.
He started dressing better, working out, even making an effort to smile at people.
And it's amazing how that one little thing, the haircut, changed everything.
Like, it shifted how he saw himself, and that changed how others saw him too.
He started talking to sales managers, sharing his goals, and eventually landed a junior sales role.
And what's even cooler is he thrived in that role. He went above and beyond, climbing the ladder until he became the chief sales executive.
Now, the authors know Larry was talented and worked hard.
But the lesson here is about that first small step.
He didn't wait for some big opportunity to fall on his lap. He made a small change that opened up all these new possibilities.
Sometimes we get stuck waiting for that big break.
But the real power is in taking those small actions that get things moving.
And that brings us to this idea of the power of small actions.
They talk about the Canadian explorer Jamie Clark, who climbed Mount Everest.
He did it by taking one step at a time.
Each step, on its own, seems pretty small.
But put them all together, and you reach the top of the world.
It changes how we think about achieving huge goals, right?
Totally. But the opposite is also true.
If we ignore those small gestures, those little acts of kindness, or if we say the wrong thing,
We can miss opportunities.
or even cause harm.
Paying attention to details, even in everyday interactions, shows how much we care.
About our work, about other people.
There's this great story about a couple, Simone and Jake.
They'd been together for 2 years, and Simone was ready for a deeper commitment.
But Jake wasn't so sure.
Their future together was sort of hanging in the balance because of this.
Then one day, Simone saw a homeless man and bought him a coat and some food.
It was just this spontaneous act of kindness.
But for Jake, it was huge.
He saw a side of Simone that he hadn't seen before.
It made him realize how much he cared about her values.
Professor Howard Markman, a relationship expert, has this great point about couples.
He says they often think they need to make these big changes to fix problems.
And they focus on what the other person needs to change.
But he says the real breakthroughs come from small changes in our own behavior.
Like Simone's little act of kindness changed Jake's perspective and made their relationship stronger.
So the point is, even little things can have a big impact on our lives and the lives of people around us.
As long as we pay attention to those details and act on them, even in those spur-of-the-moment situations.
And this idea of the power of small isn't just for personal stuff.
Koval and Thaler say it works in business too.
They use their own company, the Kaplan-Thaler Group, as an example.
They didn't start out chasing those massive contracts,
They focused on what they call the 20,000 little goals.
solving those everyday problems.
And that's how they built a foundation for success.
And that meant creating a team where everyone's work was valued, no matter how small the task seemed.
Everyone felt like they could contribute.
It's all about truth #2. Small acts tell a larger story.
They talk about how Linda and Robin became partners.
It wasn't some big business deal or a long negotiation.
It all started with a muffin.
Robin offered Linda half of her giant bran muffin.
And that little act showed Linda a lot about Robin.
It showed she was proactive, smart with money, and a team player.
Linda saw those qualities right away.
And from that one muffin, a strong partnership was born.
It's crazy how much you can learn from those little details.
Like, does someone make eye contact? How do they treat the staff? What's the vibe in their office?
Those little things can tell you more about a person or a company than a resume ever could.
They show you their real values.
And this idea goes even further, beyond individuals and businesses. It affects society as a whole.
Truth #3. Everyone matters is a big one. They talk about the butterfly ballot in the 2000 election in Palm Beach County.
It shows how a seemingly tiny design choice can have massive consequences.
The ballot was redesigned to be easier to read, but it ended up confusing a lot of voters.
Thousands of votes were miscounted because of it.
And that one little flaw, affecting individual voters in one place, may have changed the outcome of a presidential election.
It changed the course of history. It's a huge reminder that even small details, when they affect enough people, can have a huge impact.
That's right. And then there's the story of Scott Fimple in The Admiral.
It shows the power of being kind, even when it seems like no big deal.
Scott just saw a guy who looked lost and helped him find the right office.
He didn't know who the guy was.
Turns out it was the Admiral.
Maybe nothing bad would have happened if Scott hadn't helped.
But the authors point out that we might miss opportunities if we don't take those small actions.
Even a short interaction can be a chance to make a connection or leave a good impression.
So now let's get into some of the practical tips from the book.
They talk about becoming a mini-tasker.
It's about breaking those big, scary goals down into smaller steps that you can do every day.
Instead of thinking sell the whole house, you think call a real estate agent or write the property description.
It makes progress feel more manageable.
It stops you from getting overwhelmed by those huge tasks.
And they also talk about noticing those little good things that happen each day.
Even on a tough day, with a bad commute and little annoyances.
If you take a moment to notice a kid saying thank you, or a boss giving you some praise,
It can make you feel more resilient.
it reminds you that good things are happening even if they're small.
Okay, so this next one is big. Truth, #4. There is nothing small about small talk.
In our digital world, we don't always see the value of just chatting with people.
We think it's a waste of time.
But the authors argue that small talk is actually essential for building relationships and creating opportunities.
They mentioned Studs Terkel, who said that even though we have all this technology to communicate,
We might be getting worse at actually connecting with each other in person.
think about it, how often do we email someone down the hall instead of just walking over and talking to them?
We miss out on those nonverbal cues, the tone of voice, the body language.
And there are consequences to that.
This psychologist, Dr. Lester Lefton, says our reliance on technology is hurting our social skills.
Social media makes us feel like we have all these friends, but we never actually talk to many of them face to face.
The New York Times described it as this endless cocktail party where everyone shows up at different times and leaves notes on the fridge.
It's not the same as real human connection.
And that's a problem.
It can lead to isolation and social anxiety.
The authors say that when we cut out small talk to get straight to business, we create distance between people.
There's a lot of a human connection.
And Bernardo Carducci, another psychologist, makes this point about small talk being like social lubricant.
It's what gets those deeper conversations going.
Every big relationship, every business deal starts with those little interactions that break the ice.
And sometimes those small interactions can lead to amazing things, like in the story of Charlie and Bill.
Charlie was a mechanic, and Bill was a regular customer.
They'd chat every time Bill came in, just casual stuff.
Years later, Charlie was surprised to get a visit from Bill's lawyer,
Bill had left Charlie a hardware store in his will.
all because of those friendly conversations they had over the years.
It shows you that you never know what can come from those little interactions.
And the book even gives some tips on how to get better at small talk.
One thing is to use humor.
Especially when you're first meeting someone or starting a work session, it can lighten the mood.
They tell the story about how the AFL-8 duck was created.
It came from a moment of joking around during a brainstorming meeting.
Who knew?
Another tip is to be genuinely curious about other people.
Talk show hosts like Jay Leno are great at that.
They make their guests feel interesting, and that's how they build relationships.
It's about listening, asking good questions, and focusing on the other person instead of yourself.
And then there's this idea of paying attention to detail.
General Colin Powell always checked the static lines on his parachute before jumping out of a plane.
Seems like a small detail, but in that situation, missing something could be fatal.
And there was that case of the F-117 stealth fighter that crashed because a few bolts weren't installed properly,
It shows that no detail is too small to ignore.
especially when it comes to safety.
In this age of information overload, the authors talk about attention deficit trait, or ADT.
It's basically when you're so bombarded with information that you can't focus.
And they have this simple rule: read twice, send once.
It's for emails and other digital communication.
It's about taking a moment to double-check your message before you send it.
It can prevent a lot of problems from simple mistakes.
They also talk about the importance of asking questions, even if they seem basic.
Randall Tallarico didn't know what schlep meant, but he was brave enough to ask his bosses.
And it actually made him more likable.
There's that Chinese proverb, "He who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes. He who does not remains a fool forever."
Pretty wise.
And they also talk about the power of practice.
Even for those everyday interactions.
The Kaplan-Thaler group prepared like crazy for their big pitch to Revlon.
They had scripts, props, and everything timed perfectly.
It shows that even small details matter when you're trying to achieve something big.
And sometimes the biggest ideas come from the smallest places.
They talk about Carol Gardner, who created Zelda Wisdom greeting cards.
She started making funny cards to cope with her divorce, and it turned into a successful business.
And then there's Leslie Blodgett, who created Bare Essentials mineral makeup.
She took a simple idea, using minerals for makeup, and turned it into something innovative.
It shows you that inspiration can come from anywhere.
Even everyday annoyances can spark big ideas.
Like Jen Groover, who invented the Butler bag.
She was frustrated with her purse always being messy.
So she designed a new kind of purse that solved the problem, and it became a hit.
It's amazing what you can create when you pay attention to those little frustrations.
And to wrap things up, they share some examples of how small acts of kindness can have a global impact.
Don Schoendorfer started the Free Wheelchair Mission.
He designs affordable wheelchairs for people in developing countries.
It started with him focusing on one specific problem.
And it's changed the lives of countless people around the world.
It shows you how much one person can do by focusing on something that might seem small.
And then there's Shauna Fleming, who started the A Million Thanks campaign.
She just wanted to show appreciation to American troops.
But it turned into a national movement.
It's a powerful example of how many small acts of kindness can add up to something really big. So as we finish up this deep dive, the message is clear. Don't underestimate the power of small.
It can have a huge impact on our lives and the world.
So think about the small things you're doing.
Are there little actions you could take that might lead to big changes?
What small gestures could you make to improve your relationships, your work, or your community?
What small step will you take today that might have a bigger impact than you expect?
Go back and think about those stories we discussed.
How can you use this idea of thinking small to achieve your goals and overcome your challenges?
By paying attention to the power of small, you can unlock incredible possibilities in your own life.
And make the world a better place, one small step at a time.
One detail, one action, one gesture, it all adds up.
And that's the power of small.